In a small orphanage in a small village in Russia, there is a young boy. His hair is jet black and messy, and he wears tattered jeans and an old dingy gray shirt. Nothing is known of him. For 10 years he sat in the bed in his room, never moving, never blinking, never eating or sleeping. In the 10 years he has not seemed to age at all, continuing to look like a 7-year-old boy. The only thing that proved he was alive is the slow rise and fall of his chest as he breathes, and the refusal to take his eyes off anyone who enters the room alone. A lone psychiatrist came over in an attempt to find out why the boy had done nothing in 10 years. He entered the room and shut the door behind him. 30 minutes later, the orphanage's nurse came to check on the two of them. Opening the door, she saw the child, still sitting, still not moving, eyes fixed on her. However, something seemed different. He appeared a slight amount larger, not by much, but enough to make him look like a late 8 or early 9-year-old. The psychiatrist was no longer in the room. The door was the only exit, as the room had no windows, or vents, or anything, and it was in fact in the exact center of the orphanage. He continued to sit, only seen occasionally by the lady who came in to check on him, and she never closed the door upon entry. A week or so later, 2 law enforcement personnel entered the orphanage demanding to speak to the boy about the disappearance of the psychiatrist. The 2 of them entered, closing the door behind them, as the head of the orphanage stood outside the door. 30 minutes passed and not a sound came from the room. The head eased the door open. The boy was still on the bed, but the officers were no longer there. The boy was quite noticeably bigger, about the size of a 15-year-old. His skin was darker than usual, and he looked angrier than ever. But one thing remained the same, his cold, unforgiving eyes that stared at whoever entered. Eventually, the law organized a large group of 10 officers to speak to the boy. They entered the room and left the door open, until one of the younger orphans ran up and shut it, apparently in a daze. The head quickly ran to reopen the door, and upon doing so, froze him in horror. One low rumbling noise came from the room. One more. If you return to that orphanage, you will see it still continues to run. The orphans live in good care, health, and education. However, there is one room that you will see is boarded up and far from enterable. If you ask what is behind it, you will be removed forcefully from the orphanage. However, when no one's looking, if you place your ear to the door, you will hear a low, ominous growling sound. And if you listen for a bit, you will hear one more. As a child, my family was broke because both my parents were unemployed and were all forced to stay at our aunt's house. Eventually, my mom was finally able to get a job, and we bought into a small 2-bedroom apartment at some small complex called Lakehart Apartments. It stayed true to its name. It had a murky, filthy lake at the center with a bridge coming across. We lived right by it. The apartment number was 1155. How catchy. It took about 2 months to get all settled. My sister and I had to share a bedroom, which clashed horribly because I was a boy. Mind you, I was 6 at the time and I believed in cooties. I almost never got any sleep because she would tell me these creepy old tales that scared the crap out of me, and she forced me to sleep on the bottom bunk, which we found a huge cockroach hiding in shortly after getting there. She always took up all the good things and made me get into trouble for things I didn't do. One night, After a long day of school, I returned to my house to find my sister asleep on the couch. It was a huge relief to me. I wouldn't have to deal with any of her crap for an entire afternoon. I went into my bedroom and started playing around with her stuff, and about 2 more hours had passed before I became bored. As if on cue, my sister barged in and said, "Mom just called me and told me she's working late and won't be back till 12. This means we have the apartment to ourselves." That was a pretty big thing for us. We were rarely left home after 8 p.m. Even if I was left with my sister, I was excited to be home by myself. It was about 10 p.m. when my sister passed out and I was falling asleep. I heard the sound of footsteps in the hall. Oh, I thought, she must be home early. The footsteps became louder until I heard the door open. I faked being asleep. I heard a murmur instead of a kiss on the forehead. I felt hot, stinking air. It was almost as if someone or something was breathing on me. I tried hard not to tense up, as whatever was sniffing around my face and laid its talons on my chest. Luckily, it lost interest in me quickly. I peeked an open eye only to see this thing sliver up the ladder to my sister's resting body. Even if I hated her, she was my flesh and blood. I begged God to protect her from that thing. After a few minutes, I must have realized she was asleep too. I snuck a quick peek at the thing and withheld a scream. It stood on all fours, using tall, heavy legs to hold itself. The monster had a body that was completely skin and bone. The teeth protruded out of its mouth and had gray eyes and white skin. I stood up in bed and it must have noticed because it whipped its head towards me and opened its mouth. It began speaking in a raspy low hum. "What are you doing awake, darling?" If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.